Hello everyone, and welcome back to Eerie Hour. Today, I am bringing you 9 deeply unsettling true stories from the Appalachian Mountains, where isolation meets terror in the most remote camping locations imaginable. In this episode, I never dreamed of becoming a park ranger when I was a kid. Honestly, I wanted to be a conservation officer, but I did not meet the physical requirements needed for federal law enforcement. Still, my love for the outdoors never faded, so being a park ranger felt like the closest thing to the life I wanted. For those who do not know what my job involves in remote places, here is the simple version. When someone reports strange activity in restricted areas and no one is sure what is happening, I am sent in to hike out there alone and figure it out. For a long time, I worked in busy areas of the park. Lost hikers, crowded campsites, constant accidents. After years of that, you either quit, transfer, or burn out completely. I chose to transfer somewhere quiet and wild. That choice is what led me to the remote sections of the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. It is a stunning stretch of wilderness along the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and some areas there only see a few people each month. Compared to my last assignment, where I handled hundreds of tourists every week, this place felt silent and untouched. Back in the crowded areas, 3 or 4 incidents a day was normal. Twisted ankles, bear scare calls, illegal fires, nothing too serious most of the time. But in Pisgah, especially the restricted backcountry zones I patrol, weeks can pass without a single problem. It is quiet in a way that clears your mind. Just me, the mountains, and the ancient forest. Strangely enough, that peaceful place is where the most terrifying investigation of my career happened. It is unforgettable for reasons I wish I could erase. It was early October. The trees were burning with orange and red, and the cold air had that sharp, clean bite that fills your lungs. I had already been out on patrol for 3 days, checking trails and making sure no one was sneaking into protected watershed areas. I traveled alone, carrying everything on my back, camping at night and moving again at sunrise. On the 4th morning, I was about 12 miles from the nearest trailhead, deep in a part of the forest that almost no hikers ever reach, when my radio crackled. It was dispatch. Sarah's voice cut through the static. She told me they had multiple reports of gunshots in Sector 7, near the old logging roads by Henderson Creek. She asked if I could investigate. I confirmed and changed direction right away. Gunshots alone are not strange during hunting season, but this was not hunting season, and Sector 7 was closed to all activity. The land had been shut down for 2 years because of dangerous erosion. If someone was out there, they were not just breaking rules. They were trespassing in a deadly area. It took me almost 4 hours of hard hiking to reach the location she gave me. The old logging roads were barely visible, swallowed by weeds and trees. I moved slowly and quietly, listening for any sign that people were still nearby. The forest felt wrong. No birds, no small animals, just my boots in dry leaves and my steady breathing. I found the campsite just after 2 in the afternoon. It was tucked into a small clearing about 50 yards off what was left of the road, hidden behind thick rhododendron. I smelled it before I saw it. That sharp metallic scent of blood mixed with something rotten and sickening. My hand moved to my radio as I stepped closer. The campsite was small but clearly planned, a tiny one. Person tent leaned against a fallen log. A fire pit sat cold in the center. Scattered around were things that made my stomach twist. Clothes ripped apart and soaked dark with blood. A woman's jacket torn down the sleeves. Jeans sliced open cleanly, like by a blade. Then I saw the ropes. Heavy nylon rope tied between 2 trees at the edge of the clearing. The loops were shaped for wrists or ankles. The bark on the trees was torn and scraped like someone had fought hard to get free. Training took over. I did not touch a single thing. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures from every angle, marking positions and details carefully. That is when I noticed more. Dark stains soaked into the dirt near the ropes. Drag marks led away from the clearing into the brush. My heart was slamming as I followed them, every sense stretched tight. They only went about 20 yards before stopping at a patch of disturbed ground. The dirt was freshly moved, darker than the rest. Someone had buried something there. I reached for my radio to call for backup when a sound cut through the silence. A branch snapped sharply about 30 yards to my left. I froze, then I heard footsteps, slow, controlled. Someone was moving through the trees toward me. Someone who had been watching the whole time. Every part of me wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was trained, I was armed, still, out there alone, surrounded by signs of violence. I felt a fear deeper than anything I had ever known. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. The footsteps stopped. The forest went silent again, but it was not peaceful silence. It felt like something was waiting, watching. "This is the National Park Service." I called out, trying to sound steady. "Identify yourself immediately. You are trespassing on a closed crime scene." No answer came back, only that heavy, breathing silence. I made my choice. I began backing away slowly, never turning my back on the trees, and keyed my radio. I told dispatch I had found a possible homicide site and believed a suspect was nearby and watching me. I requested immediate backup and said I was evacuating. Sarah responded instantly. I could hear the fear in her voice as she told me the closest Yun. It was still 2 hours away. I told her I was moving to the trailhead. I did not run. Running invites pursuit. I walked fast but controlled toward the old road and then east to the main trail. Every few minutes I stopped to listen. For an hour, I heard nothing. Then at a creek, about 6 miles from safety, I heard footsteps again. They stayed about 50 yards to my right, matching my pace perfectly. However, it was no longer cared about hiding. They wanted me to feel it, the threat, the fear. I pushed harder, fighting exhaustion and the weight of my pack. The steps followed until I broke onto the main trail where other hikers could be. That is when the footsteps suddenly stopped. I reached the trailhead at sunset. 2 sheriff's deputies were waiting. I gave my statement, handed over my camera, and returned with a full team the next morning. What they uncovered at that disturbed patch of earth confirmed everything I feared. Human remains, a woman, buried only days earlier. Soon they found 2 more burial sites within a quarter mile. 3 women in total. All matched missing hiker reports from the past 14 months along the Appalachian Trail. The campsite held fingerprints and DNA. They identified a suspect, a man living off the grid in the forest for over 2 years, stealing from hikers and doing far worse. He chose restricted zones because he knew no one would pass through often. They never caught him. After a massive search, he vanished into the wilderness. His tent and gear were still there. It was like he simply walked away. The theory is that he had other camps and moved on to another forest, another state, another hunting ground. I still think about the footsteps that followed me through the trees, how close I came to being another patch of turned dirt. I still work in Pisgah, but never alone now, always in pairs, always extra radios. Because I learned that day the most dangerous predators in the wild walk on 2 legs. Ever since I can remember, I've always been fascinated by wildlife. That is no exaggeration either. First documentary I ever remember watching was a National Geographic special from the 80s about grizzly bears in Yellowstone. It was about studying their behavior, tracking their movements, and understanding their role in the ecosystem. If I watched it nowadays, I would probably think the production quality was pretty dated. But back then, it was the most captivating thing I had ever seen. I mean, Jane Goodall was inspiring too. But the idea of tracking large mammals through wilderness seemed like it would be strangely fulfilling work. Now, cut to about 20 years later, and I do not have to look far to understand my career path. I earned my doctorate in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, specialized in large mammal behavior, and throughout my career, I have conducted field studies on everything from elk migration patterns to wolfpack dynamics. But my current assignment, studying black bear populations in the remote hollers of West Virginia, has proven to be the most challenging and the most terrifying work I have ever undertaken. The project was straightforward on paper. I would spend 2 weeks alone in a designated study area in the Monongah National Forest, documenting bear activity through a combination of trail cameras, GPS tracking of tagged individuals, and direct observation. The area I was assigned was particularly isolated, a drainage basin surrounded by steep ridges that few hikers ever ventured into. It was perfect for bears, which meant it was perfect for my research, or so I thought. I arrived at my base camp location in mid-September, when the bears were actively foraging in preparation for winter. I set up my tent in a small clearing beside a creek, positioned my equipment, and established my food cache 15 ft up a sturdy oak tree using a bear-proof canister and heavy rope. This is standard protocol. Black bears are intelligent and persistent, but they typically cannot reach food stored at that height using proper techniques. The first 4 days of the study went exactly as planned. I hiked the drainage, checking my trail cameras, documenting scat and tracks, and observing 2 different bears from a safe distance. The forest was alive with sound during the day, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the wind moving through the canopy. At night, it was quieter, but still comfortable. I would hear the occasional owl, the distant yip of coyotes, and once the huffing grunt of a bear moving through the darkness. Well away from my camp, all normal, all expected. The 5th night, everything changed. I had returned to camp around 7:00 in the evening, exhausted from a long day of hiking the ridge lines. I prepared a simple dinner, hung my trash with my food cache, and settled into my tent to review the day's notes and download data from my GPS unit. The sun set around 8, and by 9 it was fully dark. That is when I first heard it. It started as a vocalization unlike anything I had encountered in 15 years of fieldwork. It was not a bear sound as I know every vocalization black bears make, from the huffing warnings to the bawling of cubs to the jaw-popping threats of aggressive adults. This was nothing like those sounds at all. This one was deep and rough, low and heavy, and it seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath me. It lasted only a few seconds, maybe 5, and then it stopped. I stayed completely still inside my tent, my headlamp switched off, barely breathing as I listened. All the usual night sounds were gone, no insects, no owls, nothing at all, just silence. After about 2 minutes, I heard something moving. Something large was walking through the forest, maybe 60 yards from my camp, but the steps were wrong. They came in 2 steady beats, one after the other, not the 4-foot rhythm of a bear, not the light movement of a deer. I tried to convince myself it was a person, maybe another researcher or a lost hiker, but we were 12 miles from the nearest trail, deep in land that took serious skill to navigate. Nobody walks out there at night without a strong reason. I called out, telling them I was a researcher and asking if they needed help. No answer came back. The footsteps stopped. I waited in the dark for 20 long minutes and heard nothing else. In the end, I told myself I had been mistaken. That maybe a bear in thick brush can sound human sometimes. That isolation was playing tricks on my mind. I finally drifted into broken, restless sleep. At dawn, I woke to find my food cache destroyed. Not just disturbed, but completely torn apart. The rope wasn't chewed or worn down. It was ripped clean through, as if something had grabbed it and torn it with raw strength. The bear-proof canister, built to survive even the strongest claws and jaws, had been forced open. My supplies were scattered everywhere, but what truly chilled me was this. The canister had been hanging 15 feet up the tree. There were no claw marks on the trunk, no signs that anything had climbed. I spent the entire morning studying the scene, taking photos, forcing logic into everything I saw. The tracks near the site were strange. partial prints in the leaves that seemed too large for a bear. Long, distorted, almost human in shape. I made casts, took measurements, wrote everything down. Based on the size, whatever made those prints would have stood between 7.5 and 8 feet tall, with a foot nearly 17 inches long. I should have left right then. Safety rules say a study should end if your life is at risk. But I am a scientist, and I needed answers. I convinced myself it was an unusually large bear with strange behavior, maybe one that had learned to defeat bear-proof gear, or had some rare genetic abnormality. Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. I moved what little food I had left to a new spot, strengthened my camp, and prepared to record whatever was visiting with better equipment. That night, I set up a motion-triggered audio recorder and aimed a high-resolution trail camera at the new food location. The sounds started again just after 9. This time they were closer, and there was more than one. The same deep, shaking vocal sound echoed through the trees, and then another answered it from a different direction. They were communicating. I recorded everything, my training pushing me forward even as fear tightened in my chest. The calls went on for about 10 minutes, circling my camp, always staying just outside my headlamp's reach. Then the warning began. There is no other way to describe it. Rocks started landing in my camp, not random throws, each one closer than the last. The first hit near the fire pit. The next struck the tree beside my tent. The third slammed into the tent itself, not hard enough to tear it, but hard enough to send a clear message. I was being warned. I have spent my life around dangerous animals. I have faced bluff charges from grizzlies, been watched by mountain lions, and stood my ground against angry bull moose. In every case, their actions made sense. Territory, food, protection. But this was different. This felt planned, measured, intelligent. It felt like something was studying me, reading my fear, deciding what to do next. I knew I had to leave at first light. I did not sleep at all. I sat upright inside my tent all night, my GPS in one hand and my radio in the other, listening to movement around me. Twice, I heard breathing outside my tent, so close that the fabric shifted with each slow breath. When sunrise finally came, I packed only what I had to and began the 12-mile hike out. After about 3 miles, I knew I was not alone. The same heavy 2-step footsteps followed behind me, always about 50 yards back. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. I kept recording everything, clinging to procedure as fear pressed in on me. The following continued for 4 miles. Then, as I reached the top of a ridge that led toward the main trail, the footsteps stopped. I turned and saw nothing, but far behind me, one final call rolled through the forest. The same deep sound. This time it did not feel threatening. Almost, and this is hard to explain, almost like a goodbye. I reported everything to my supervisors and to the National Forest Service. Acoustic experts reviewed the recordings. They said the sounds did not match any known animal in the area. The tone and frequency were unlike anything in their databases. Forensic tracker with over 30 years of experience examined the tracks. He said they were made by a large, heavy, 2-legged creature, but he would not guess beyond that. The broken food cache was never explained. The strength needed to tear that rope and pry open the canister was beyond what a black bear could manage. And with no signs of climbing, whatever reached that cache either stood impossibly tall or used a method that left no trace at all. I finished my report without making conclusions, only observations, but privately, I know what I experienced. I spent 5 nights in the territory of something that should not exist, something that showed intelligence, communication, and control. And the most disturbing part is that it could have killed me at any time. It chose not to. Instead, it drove me away with warnings. I have never returned to that place. The project was moved for official safety reasons. My coworkers accepted that story without question, but I still think about those nights, the sounds, the steps, the awareness that something watched me, understood me, and made the choice to let me go. And I wonder how many others still live out there in the hidden spaces of the Appalachian Mountains, existing just beyond what we can explain. You might find this a very unusual submission, but I feel it must be shared. I prefer to remain anonymous for reasons that will soon make sense, but I promise that every word I speak is true. I am what most people would call an experienced solo backpacker. I have been hiking since I was 12 years old. I have completed many long, distance trails, including parts of the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. I also run a small but successful wilderness blog where I document remote trail sections most hikers never reach. My greatest interest is abandoned or rarely traveled parts of established trails. There is something strangely powerful about walking paths that nature has reclaimed, where you might go days without seeing another human soul. The isolation is calming. The wilderness feels more real, less staged for visitors. That passion led me to an abandoned section of the Appalachian Trail in eastern Tennessee, and to an experience that completely changed how I see the world. The stretch I planned to explore was a 12-mile section officially shut down in the late 1990s due to landslides and erosion. The trail had been rerouted, and the original path left behind. From what I found, only 1 or 2 hikers entered that area each year. It was perfect for what I wanted to document. I began my hike on a Wednesday morning in early August. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures. I carried supplies for 4 days, planning to hike the abandoned trail and return through a connecting route. The first day passed quietly. The trail was overgrown but still visible, with faded markings and a faint path beneath the plants. That evening, about 6 miles in, I made camp beside a small creek. I set up my tent, a lightweight 2-person model I had used for 3 years without a single problem. Cooked dinner and settled in for the night. I clearly remember checking my watch before closing my eyes. It was 9:47 in the evening. I even wrote it in my journal because it felt strange going to sleep so early. I planned to wake up at dawn and hike to a nearby ridge to watch the sunrise. But when I woke up, it was already full daylight. Not the soft early morning light I expected, but bright sun. I checked my watch in confusion. It read 7:23 in the morning. I had somehow slept almost 10 hours straight. That alone was strange for me in the backcountry, where I usually wake up again and again to every small sound or shift of the wind. But the time was not the strangest part. When I unzipped my tent and looked around, I felt a deep chill crawl through me. My tent was no longer where I had pitched it. I have a strong sense of direction and space from years of hiking, and I clearly remembered placing my tent parallel to the creek, about 15 feet from the water, beside a large hemlock tree for cover. But now I was at least 30 feet from the creek, in a small open clearing I had not even noticed the night before. The hemlock tree was gone. My first thought was that I must have sleepwalked and moved my tent somehow, but that made no sense. The tent had been fully staked down tightly. The stakes were still deep in the ground. My gear inside was arranged exactly how I had left it. There was no possible way I could have lifted and carried the entire tent with me inside, and then reset everything perfectly without waking up. I spent the next hour slowly searching the area, trying to understand what had happened. I found the exact spot where my tent had originally been set up. The stake holes were still there in the dirt, and the flattened grass showed the shape of the tent clearly. But there were no drag marks, no broken plants, no trail showing how the tent could have been moved. It looked as if the tent, with me inside it, had simply been lifted into the air and placed in a new spot. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I had been more exhausted than I thought and set up in the wrong place. Maybe my memory was fooling me. I packed up, deeply unsettled, but forced myself to continue the trip. I hiked all day, taking photos and notes, trying to push the strange morning out of my thoughts. That night, I chose a different campsite on a flat stretch of trail with clear views in every direction. I set up my tent slowly and carefully, even taking pictures of it from several angles. Inside, I arranged my gear in a very specific way. Boots at the foot of the tent facing left. Backpack against the right wall. Sleeping pad placed perfectly in the center. Before going to sleep, I tied a small piece of bright orange paracord to the tent zipper so I could instantly tell if anything had been touched. When I woke up again, it was full daylight. My watch showed 6:58 in the morning, and once again, something was terribly wrong. My boots, which I had left neatly facing left, were now tied together in a complicated knot I had never learned how to make. It was not a quick knot. It was layered and tight, like someone had taken time with it. My backpack had been moved from the right side of the tent to the left, and worse than that, my sleeping pad was now turned sideways. I had been sleeping across it at an angle that should have been uncomfortable enough to wake me instantly. The orange paracord was gone. I searched the tent in a panic. It was nowhere inside. Then I stepped outside and saw it. It was tied to a tree branch about 20 feet away, hanging at eye level, gently swinging in the morning wind. My stomach dropped. I checked my compass next. It was not working. The needle spun lazily and would not settle. I pulled out my backup compass. It pointed south where north should be, as if the earth itself had flipped. I tested both compasses again and again, in different spots, holding them at different angles. The result never changed. Both told me that north was behind me, in the direction I had already walked from. My watch, which had worked perfectly before, had stopped. The second hand was frozen exactly at 3:33. I tried to wind it. It was completely stuck. My phone, which I kept only for emergency GPS and photos, showed a date 3 days in the future. According to it, it was Saturday. It should have been Thursday. That was the moment I decided to leave immediately. But when I tried to find the trail, it was gone. The clear path I had followed the day before had vanished completely. I stood where the trail should have been, but the ground showed no sign that anyone had ever walked there. No worn dirt, no broken plants, no faded blazes on trees. It was like the trail had never existed. I spent hours trying to find my way out using land features and my broken compasses. The deeper I went, the more lost I became. The forest felt wrong. The trees were placed in strange patterns. The land seemed subtly twisted. I kept walking in circles, returning to the same places without meaning to. Even the sun made no sense in the sky. As evening came, I had no choice but to stay where I was. I did not set up my tent this time. I sat with my back pressed against a large oak tree, my headlamp on, my knife in my hand, forcing myself to stay awake so I could see what was happening to me. I remember the sun going down. I remember the forest sinking into darkness. I remember the stars appearing above me. There were more stars than I had ever seen before, and their patterns looked slightly wrong, unfamiliar in a way I could not explain. And then there is nothing, no moment of falling asleep, no slow fading into dreams, just a blank space in my memory. I woke up in daylight. I was lying on the ground 30 feet from the oak tree. My tent's rainfly was covering me, even though I had never taken it out of my pack. My knife was gone. My headlamp was off and placed neatly beside my head. My watch, which had stopped at 3:33, was now ticking again and showed 10:15 in the morning. But what finally shattered me were the photos. I opened my phone to check the images I had taken over the past few days. They were there, but mixed in with them were dozens of pictures I did not remember taking at all. Photos of me sleeping inside my tent, taken from outside, looking in. Photos of me walking during the day, captured from behind and above, as if someone had been watching from the trees. Photos of my campsite at night, the flash lighting up my tent with my body visible through the mesh, completely unconscious. And one final photo taken at night with the flash on. It showed me standing in a clearing I did not recognize. My eyes were open, but they looked empty. My arms were raised above my head in a posture that felt ritual-like. And behind me, barely visible in the dark beyond the reach of the flash, were figures, more than one, tall, humanoid shapes forming a loose circle around me, watching. I do not know how I found my way out of those woods. I have fractured memories of walking, of following a creek downstream, of eventually stumbling onto a paved road where a worried driver stopped and helped me, taking me into town. I was told I had been missing for 6 days, even though I had only packed enough supplies for 4, and my memories only cover about 3 days at most. The police found my car exactly where I had left it at the trailhead. They sent a search team back into the woods to look for anything that might explain what happened, but they found nothing strange at all, just normal forest, a section of trail that had been shut down. No signs of struggle, no signs of damage. My tent and most of my equipment were never found. I still have the photos on my phone. I have only shown them to 3 people, and each of them gave me logical explanations. Sleepwalking mixed with memory loss. Carbon monoxide poisoning from my camp stove causing hallucinations. A mental break caused by isolation. But none of those ideas explained the photos taken from outside my tent, or how my gear moved in impossible ways, or how I lost 6 full days. I have never gone back to that part of the trail, and I never will. But sometimes, usually around 3:33 in the morning, I wake up and notice small things in my apartment have been moved. A book I left on the coffee table is now on the kitchen counter. My keys are hanging on a hook I never use. And once, only once, I found orange paracord tied to my bedroom doorknob. The same exact knot I had used in the woods. The same cord that vanished from my tent that morning. I do not know what I met in those Tennessee mountains. I do not know if it was something outside of me, or if something inside my own mind broke. But I do know that there are places deep in the Appalachian wilderness where the normal rules of reality seem to fail, where time behaves strangely, where the mind cannot be trusted. And I know that whatever happened to me, there followed me home. On the rare occasions when someone asks what I do for a living, my answer always leads to the same mistake. I tell them I am an archaeologist who specializes in indigenous cultural sites. They smile and say, "So you dig up dinosaurs?" And then I explain, no, that is paleontology. What I study are the physical remains of old human cultures, mainly Native American sites in the eastern United States. My job is to document these places, understand how people lived there, and help protect their historical importance. I measure site boundaries, record any surface artifacts, take detailed notes, and research the cultural and spiritual importance of the land using historical records and guidance from tribal representatives. I suppose I am a history nerd and deeply invested in preservation, but I love my job for another reason as well: the fieldwork. I have always felt more alive outdoors than buried in a dusty archive. So working in remote places was a major reason I chose this path. I often work at isolated sites, but sometimes I am sent to locations that feel heavy in a way that goes beyond history. I mean places where terrible things happened, places filled with pain and loss so strong that even someone who does not believe in anything strange can feel that something is wrong. The site I am about to describe was one of those places. It was the location of a Cherokee settlement in the Great Smoky Mountains, one of many communities that were forced to leave during the Trail of Tears in the 1830s. My job was to conduct an early survey before the National Park Service could declare it a protected historical site. The work would take about a week, and because the location was about 8 miles from the nearest road, I would need to camp there the entire time. I arrived on a Monday morning in late September. The hike-in was difficult but manageable, following an old footpath that had likely been used by the Cherokee long ago. The settlement site sat in a narrow valley beside a clear mountain stream, surrounded by ridges thick with hemlock and oak trees. It was beautiful in a harsh, quiet way, the kind of place that could give a small community everything it needed: fresh water, hunting, shelter from storms, good soil for growing food. But the moment I stepped into the valley, I felt uneasy. There was a heavy pressure in the air that had nothing to do with hiking. The forest was far too quiet. No birds, no small animals, only the stream and the wind moving through the trees. I had worked at many archaeological sites before, including other Trail of Tears locations. But I had never felt such a strong sense of not being welcome. I set up my base camp at the edge of the valley, far enough from the actual settlement to avoid disturbing anything important, but close enough to walk there easily each day. My tent was a sturdy 4-season model, and I laid out my equipment with my usual careful routine. Survey tools, GPS, camera, notebooks, reference materials, everything I would need to do a proper survey. The first day of work went smoothly. I mapped the boundaries of the settlement, identifying where long houses once stood by the shallow dips in the ground and the patterns of old foundation stones. I measured and photographed everything, comparing it with written records describing the community. According to history, around 60 people had lived here before they were taken. Families who had known this valley for generations. People who had buried their loved ones in the surrounding hills. That first night, the dreams began. It was around midnight, based on the moon, when I woke up in a panic. In the dream, I watched families being dragged from their homes. Soldiers in rough uniforms pulled people from the long houses while children screamed and women cried out in Cherokee. I understood every word they said, even though I do not speak the language. I could feel their terror and hopelessness as if it were my own. The dream felt real in a way that shook me. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat despite the cold mountain air. I told myself it was only my subconscious reacting to the tragic history I had been reading. But when I unzipped my tent to breathe and calm down, I saw the symbols. Drawn in the dirt around my tent was a rough circle about 15 feet wide. Inside it were strange markings I did not recognize. Each one was carefully placed, as if made with purpose. In the moonlight, they felt like warnings, though I could not explain why. I took photos of them quickly and climbed back into my tent, too shaken to investigate in the dark. The next morning, I photographed the symbols again in daylight and sent the images to a colleague who worked closely with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I climbed to a ridge later that day so my satellite phone could get a signal. Her reply came quickly. She told me the symbols were real Cherokee spiritual warning signs, used to mark areas of restless or angry spirits. They were old in style, from before the time of removal. When she asked where I had found them and I explained that they had appeared overnight around my tent, there was a long pause. Then she said my name with concern in her voice. "You need to understand what that place truly is," she told me. That was not just a settlement. It was where families made their last stand against being taken. They hid inside the long houses. Soldiers burned them out. People died there. Children died there. If something is happening, you must be very careful and show respect. I promised her I would, but that night, the activity grew stronger. The dreams returned, worse than before. This time I was not just watching, I was living through it. I could feel the hands of soldiers grabbing me. I could smell the smoke from burning homes. I could hear my family crying, even though I knew they were not truly mine. I woke around 3 in the morning to the sound of voices outside my tent. Women and children were singing. A soft, mournful song that felt like it belonged to the morning. The sound was filled with grief, so deep it felt heavy on my chest. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, afraid to move, afraid to look. The singing went on for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes, and then slowly faded away. When the sun rose, I checked my equipment. I kept a voice-activated recorder running at night for field notes, and I had left it on. When I played it back, my blood ran cold. The singing was recorded clearly, multiple voices in harmony, sounding exactly like traditional Cherokee music. But there was more. Between verses, I could hear footsteps moving around my tent. The sound of fabric shifting, and once clearly the scrape of fingers moving across the outside of my tent. I should have left then. Every rule of safety said I should, but I am also a scientist and I needed to understand what was happening. On the third day, I stopped working on the site and focused only on documenting what was going on around me. I set out more recording devices. I placed my camera on a tripod aimed at my tent. I prepared myself to face another night. That night, everything changed. The dreams came again, but they did not end when I woke up. I opened my eyes around 2 in the morning and saw them, dozens of translucent figures standing throughout the valley. Some near my tent, others near the old settlement. Men, women, children, all dressed in old Cherokee clothing from the time of removal. They were not threatening. They were simply there, moving as if they were still alive in their world. I watched a woman tend a fire that was not really there. I watched children play a game with sticks. I saw an elderly man sitting on a rock, staring at the stars as if lost in thought. Then one of them noticed me. A middle-aged woman with eyes full of endless sadness looked directly at me. In that moment, I felt everything she felt. The pain of losing her home, the fear of the march west, the anger at the injustice, and the desperate hope that someone would remember, that their story would not be lost. It was too much. I began to cry without meaning to. The woman lifted her hand toward me, not as a threat, but as a quiet acknowledgement. And then she faded away. All of them did. The valley was empty again except for me, my tent, and the steady sound of the stream. I did not sleep after that. When morning came, I checked my camera. It had recorded it all. Hours of video showing faint, see-through figures appearing and vanishing throughout the valley. The timestamp showed the activity happened mostly between 2 and 4 in the morning. I packed my gear and left that day. I finished my report on the site and recommended that it be protected. I also added a separate note explaining that the location carried deep spiritual meaning and that any future work should be done with guidance from Cherokee spiritual leaders. The National Park Service accepted my findings and the site became protected. To my knowledge, no more work has been done there. I returned only once, 2 years later, as part of a ceremony organized by the Eastern Band of Cherokee to honor the dead. It took place during the day and nothing strange happened, but as we were leaving, my colleague pulled me aside. "They were trying to tell you their story," she said. "You were the first person to truly stay there since it happened. They needed someone to remember. You did that, but you should never go back alone. This is their land, and some grief is too heavy for only one witness. I have not been back since. I carry their story with me as I was meant to. But sometimes, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, I wake up and hear that distant morning song, reminding me that some places in the Appalachian Mountains hold memories that refuse to fade. Grief that spans generations and spirits that will never truly rest until their story is fully told and understood.